We'll be looking at Luke 19 tonight. If you want to turn over there, if you're not already there. First question on our handout, of course, deals with actually the second part of our lesson that we're going to look at tonight. But the think about it question is, how would you describe a responsible person? What are some qualities or characteristics of a responsible person?
Trustworthy.
Okay, that would be a good one. I didn't write that one down, but that is a good one.
They do what they say they'll do.
Okay, that's part of what makes a responsible individual is when they tell you they're going to do something, they follow through with it, don't they? They do it. What else? What are some other characteristics?
I'd say someone that sees what needs to be taken care of and does it without anybody telling them.
Yeah, they don't need constant supervision, do they? They don't need somebody constantly standing by their side telling them what to do or reminding them what needs to be done. They're people who see something that needs to be done, jump in and help to accomplish that or get it done themselves. Anything else? Okay. Yeah, that would have to come into play when it comes to a responsible person, because if they're going to do what's wrong, they're not going to be very responsible, are they? Would you say that a responsible person is selfish or selfless? Yeah, I don't think you can be selfish and be too responsible. Maybe responsible for yourself, but that'd be about it. So there's a lot of different qualities or characteristics that enter into the idea of a person being responsible. One of the parable, that's the second part of our lesson that we're going to look at tonight, that Jesus deals with here in Luke 19, really deals with his servants, and some of his servants were responsible, some of them were irresponsible. And so we're going to talk, whenever we get to that parable, Lord willing, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can be responsible servants of Jesus today and what we can learn from those in that example. But before we do that, the first 10 verses of chapter 19 deals with the story of Zaccheus. And of course, Zaccheus is one of those stories probably all of us learned from the time that we were in Bible class as children. Still an interesting story to me. It never gets old to me, but a lot of these great Bible stories are like that, and it's part of what keeps us engaged and studying and interested is, every time you look at them, there's something else that comes out about it and always more to learn about it. But Zaccheus is described by Luke in a certain way here in verse 2. And how does Luke describe Zaccheus, specifically here in verse 2? I know there's some other things that he mentions about him in verse 3, but I just want to concentrate right now on verse 2.
He's rich.
Do what?
He's rich.
Okay, he was rich. And what other tidbit of information does he give us about him?
Chief of public.
Yeah, he was the chief of tax collectors. And that's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, this is the one and only time in the Bible that adjective is used to describe a tax collector, a chief tax collector. And so we don't really, there's not a whole lot of information about it, we just kind of surmise that basically he was probably the one who was in charge of appointing all the other tax collectors and then overseeing the monies of those taxes that would have been brought in. And so my question is this: do you think it was a coincidence that he was rich? No? How do you think he got rich?
That's a big responsibility.
Did what?
That was
Skimming off the top.
Skimming off the top? Okay. What were tax collectors famous for in that day and age? Over collecting, right? And he was in a unique situation. Like I said, you don't read about anybody, or I don't think you do in the Bible, that's in this situation where he's kind of the ultimate middleman. Because he's responsible for all these other people, and then they're bringing him all this money. he's turning those monies over to Rome, and so he's kind of in a position where he can, as long as he gives Rome what Rome wants, what's due to them, he can do whatever he wants and get away with it. And judging from the reaction of the people when Jesus decided to associate with him, I think that's probably it's safe to say that he'd done plenty of skimming off the top, don't you? Because they did not have any respect for Zaccheus. And so it was pretty common in this day and age, again, for these kind of people to cheat others, to exact more than what was due them, and to become very rich in the process of doing that. And so that probably tells us a little bit about how Zaccheus became rich. But in verse 3, not everything about Zaccheus is good or perfect. What are some of the problems that Zaccheus has, or what main problem, I guess, that he had? Yeah, he was what we would call in school a shrimp. And I guess today, if you're going to be politically correct, he was vertically challenged. So that's how you can describe him today. But compared to everybody else, he was a guy who was pretty short in stature. And so what are just some common reactions of people who don't fit into the normal mold of society? Did I phrase that good enough, or is that clear as muddy water?
You say you get little man syndrome?
Do what?
Or you say you get little man syndrome?
Well, I would say that people treated him differently, wouldn't you? And I think that's kind of implied as he's in this crowd, and he's trying to get where he can see Jesus, but he can't get there. And if you got this little guy who's trying to push through the crowd, what do you think the crowd's going to do to him? Well, they're not going to get out of the way, are they? I mean, you get a big guy and he's pushing through the crowd, probably most people are going to move or get out of the way. But not a guy who's short in stature. Think it's possible he had low self-esteem? It's possible. Some people today who don't fit into the normal physical of society do, don't they? Pretty common in our day and age. Probably didn't have a lot of respect from other people, and when you couple that with his job, people didn't like him at all. They didn't have any use for Zaccheus. And so, how does he solve this problem that he has? Second part of question number 3.
Climbed into a sycamore tree.
Yeah, he climbed up a tree. And specifically, why? What is Zaccheus trying to accomplish by this? Yeah, he's trying to see Jesus. Now, kind of pause just a moment here with me, and let's try to appreciate the context that we're reading about here. Why was it so difficult to see Jesus? Yeah, he's heading toward Jerusalem, remember. That's his goal. Everybody knows it. He's traveling this route, and people are just flocking to him. They're just surrounding him. And are people wanting to see Jesus? Have they heard things about him? Yeah, they've heard about his teachings, they've heard about his miracles, and so, everybody wants to get a glimpse at Jesus. Do you think there was any other motivation by Zaccheus than just pure physical observation? Okay, yeah, I think everybody would have wanted to have a conversation with Jesus in that day and age, don't you? Especially a person, who is really interested in him. And I guess the point that I'm driving at is, what do we learn about the life of Zaccheus after Jesus begins talking to him?
Honest. He tries to be honest.
Okay, so evidently it seems like he's had a change of heart, doesn't it? You read about him a little bit earlier that he's this chief tax collector, And again, we're kind of surmising, maybe reading between the lines a little bit here, and saying, well, he probably got these riches. He was a rich man, probably got them by dishonest means. But it seems like he's had this change of heart. And what do people know about Jesus?
He can read your mind. He knows what you think.
Okay, he knows everybody, doesn't he? He knows what's inside. He knows the heart. And while everybody else in that day and age, do you think that the people probably cared that Zacchaeus had a change of heart? Think they were sympathetic toward him, and now they were all like, hey, you can come be our friend now. But what do we know about Jesus, though? How does Jesus feel about tax collectors? Yeah, he's sympathetic toward him, isn't he? He's compassionate toward him. He cares about him when a lot of people in society didn't want anything to do with it. So Zacchaeus, he's obviously had this change of heart. He's heard about Christ and about probably the idea that he offered forgiveness. Probably about the idea that he wanted to associate with people like that he was compassionate and sympathetic toward them. And so I think it's more than just seeing who Jesus is, just laying eyes on him. I think he wants to really see Jesus. He wants to know more about this guy. He wants to hear him teach. There's so many things that are probably going through the mind of Zacchaeus, but it would start with the physical observation of Christ. And so he's a guy who's desperately trying to lay eyes on Jesus. So Jesus walks by. Of course, he sees him up in the tree, tells him to come down, and he was going to go to his house. Question number 4 is, how does Zacchaeus respond to Jesus' request? Yeah, he's excited, didn't he? So that kind of indicates to us, did he just want to lay eyes on Jesus? No, he was excited that he had this opportunity to spend some time with him, to learn more about him. And just think about in Zacchaeus' case here. Here he is. He's climbing up in this tree. Did he say anything to Christ? No, he doesn't call out to him or anything, but the Bible says Jesus is walking by and he stops and he looks up in the tree. Never met this guy before. And he calls him by name. He says, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm gonna go be a guest at your house today. And so that was tremendously exciting for Zacchaeus, and of course he was excited at the opportunity. The Bible says he hurried down the tree, right? He didn't just mope down or climb down, but he was excited and rushed to help bring this about. So think about it again. Zacchaeus' case, Jesus is going to be his unexpected guest. Did Zacchaeus speak to him? Did Zacchaeus ask him to come over? No. Jesus told him he was going to come over. And so all that had to be very appealing to Zacchaeus. So question number 5 here, we talked about it just a little bit, but what do Zacchaeus' actions reveal about his character? What are some things that we learn about the character of the heart of Zacchaeus here? And specifically looking at verse 6 and 8 there. Yeah. So, like I said, evidently he was a guy who'd had a change of heart, and I think what he was trying to do, he's trying to make amends, wasn't he? He knew that he probably hadn't been living right, and he knew he needed to do something about it, but exactly what needed to be done probably wasn't exactly sure here. So, what does he point out that he's done? Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody accused him of cheating, of taking something by false accusation, why would you give back fourfold if you weren't guilty? I'd just say, no, you got the wrong guy, wouldn't you? I think he was giving back fourfold because he was guilty and he knew it. And so he was trying to do what was right. He was trying to make amends. He's trying to get things turned around. You know, he's given half of his goods to feed the poor. The normal Jew of that day, I guess at most, would have given about 20%. Normal faithful Jew of that day would have given about 20% of their goods to help out with the poor. But here he was, and he was giving half. And so it kind of indicates to me, again, he's had this change of heart, and he's trying to figure out what he needs to do. Now, he's trying to do things right. He's trying to make amends, and he's not really sure exactly, you know, everything that needs to be done. So he's a pretty unique individual in the Scripture. Now, while Zaccheus is happy that Jesus is coming to visit him, and probably Jesus is happy that he's going to Zaccheus' house too, who's not excited about the invitation to come to the house?
Only Jews. Other Jews.
Yeah, the crowd begins to gossip and to murmur among themselves, and that was pretty common in that day and age. Go ahead.
Well, as I read it, I see it a little different. I see him as being, because he is a tax collector to begin with, everybody's going to look down on him to begin with. He works for the Roman government, and so he's going to be a lower class. Everybody's there. And I see him as being a person who wants to be known as, you know, I'm being fair, I'm doing things right. And Lord's going to know it. And I think he knows that. And I think he's one of the things that he's wanting for everybody to see. I'm doing it right. Because he calls him the son of Abraham.
Yeah.
And so I see it a little bit different. Not that he's trying to make amends, but that he's done this right and even puts himself out. If I've been wrong, I'll do this. To me, it looks like he's always been a pretty good guy, but because he works for the Roman government, the Jews ain't gonna like him, you know, at all.
Yeah, well, that would be part of it, undoubtedly, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that. I think it's not just that he's a tax collector, but I mean he's a known thief, and so it's not like he was just out here honestly conducting business, and that's, I mean, what tax collector do you know in the Scripture that didn't cheat somebody? I mean, that's just kind of the nature of the office. And so, yeah, but you may be right, I may be way off, but I think there's a little bit more than that to it. He is, and again, the crowds and you know, the Jews specifically they're just aggravated. Well, they think it below the dignity of a religious person to associate with somebody like that. And so, yeah, the fact that he worked for Rome and took the Jews' money and gave it to Rome, that would have made him definitely lose favor in the sight of the Jews. But I think it's also the fact that, you know, this guy is a known criminal. And so Jesus, why would Jesus associate with somebody like that? So that's, you know, you think about what type of people did the Jews murmur about the most? Jesus associating with. Yeah, prostitutes too, right? That was part of it, and it wasn't just because these people were accused of being that. It's because they were that. I mean, they were known for those things. So, yeah, it's one of those situations where the Jews are looking at it and say any dignified religious person would keep their distance from a guy like this. And so they didn't take favorably to the fact that Jesus was going to his house and he was going to associate with it. So question number 7 is this: how is the concluding verse of this passage significant? And maybe that's where I'm trying to drive at here, because I think that's the indication to me, Dennis, because the indication is he's a sinner. And that's, Jesus said, the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost. So to me, it's kind of indicative he wasn't living a righteous or pure lifestyle. But again, maybe I'm off in that assessment there.
Well, and I get it, again, again, a little different because Zaccheus answered, when they're saying this about him, Zaccheus says, wait a minute, I do this, I give back, his answer there is because they're, I assume they're murmuring loud enough that everybody's hearing it. He said, I ain't one of them. I mean, that's the way I read it.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to respectfully disagree then. But how's that concluding verse 10? How's that significant?
Well, that he's there for all sinners.
Yeah, what the Jews fail to understand is whose salvation for? Okay, yeah, everyone, but specifically a sinner. Is it for the righteous? Do they need salvation? The righteous man needs salvation? No. Who needs to be saved? Sinners. And so they didn't understand that's the situation that Zaccheus was in. Jesus came to seek and to save him. And they didn't like the fact that he associated with them, but what type of people was Jesus looking for? Was he looking for righteous people? He was looking for, Zaccheus was exactly the type of person he was looking for. So who better to save than a sinner? And that's what the Jews, I don't know why, but they just never could wrap their minds around that idea of Jesus spending time with these people and associating with them. But again, that was his mission. So kind of use that as a springboard. Question number 8. Go ahead, that's the hand.
Yeah, just add, they didn't think, they thought Jesus was filling their prophecy, not any got anything to do with Gentiles. So
Yeah.
they had a hard time with that also. And I don't know if that kid, it doesn't say if he was Jew or not, but he's Roman, he probably Gentile, right? I think.
Yeah.
Still not.
Well, I think kind of the narrative or the indication is he's probably a descendant of Abraham. But I think when Jesus makes that statement too, he's talking about more than just a physical descendant, don't you? Because I think he's pointing out, you're not just a physical descendant of Abraham, you're a spiritual child of Abraham. That's the heart of Abraham. But question number 8 here, kind of use that as a springboard. And the question is this: does a person's reputation often affect our interaction with it? Doesn't it? So do you think today that we associate with the type of people Jesus associated with? You think that's kind of our nature?
We tend to associate with people that's like us.
And Jesus did that too, didn't he? I mean, he associated with the righteous. Not like he spent all of his time with sinners, right? But he didn't spend all of his time with the righteous either, did he? He spent time with those who were lost, with those who were sinners, with those who needed to be saved. And that's because that's what his mission was. That's why he came. He didn't come to call the righteous, came to call sinners to repentance. And so the question is this: what responsibilities then, what can we learn from that? What responsibilities do we have to help people of bad reputation?
We should try to help them change that reputation by obeying the word of God.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I think about Jesus that was different than everybody else is the fact that he cared about it. I mean, he showed them that he cared about it. He didn't care how other people treated him or interacted with him. He had compassion for them, didn't he? And he wanted to help them. And like Danny pointed out, specifically, he didn't go meet with people to share in their sin, did he? I mean, that wasn't his purpose in going to their house and interacting with them and spending time with them. But it was to offer them forgiveness, wasn't it? It was trying to help them out. And of course, in order to do that, you got to spend a little bit of time with them, don't you? And Jesus did that. So it's a good lesson for us because, I think a lot of times we are influenced by a person's reputation. But these people's reputations weren't very good in the eyes of the public. But that's the type of people that Jesus came to save. That's the type of people he was looking for, not righteous people, but people who needed forgiveness. So a good lesson for us, not sharing in sin with those people, not spending time with them to participate in the things that are wrong in their life, but spend some time with them, offer them forgiveness, show them you care, you have some compassion, and spend a little fellowship or time with them by doing that. All right, so the story of Zaccheus. Anybody got any comments, questions, or anything? Let's talk about the parable of the 10. New King James Version says minas. That's the original Greek word there, in case you're wondering. I think was a King James Version say pounds. Is that right? I don't remember if it's talents or pounds. Anyway, so we have a statement that begins in before the parable itself in verse 11 and gives us the reason as to why Jesus chose to tell this parable. And what was that reason?
No, he's getting closer to Jerusalem one time.
Yeah, the people know. Remember, he told his disciples. It kind of seems like it's common knowledge now that Jesus is going to Jerusalem. And what are they anticipating when he gets there?
The kingdom of God's going to appear.
Yeah, this is the kingdom, right? This is what we've read about in the Old Testament. This is what's been prophesied. Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem. He's going to become a king. He's going to establish this kingdom. We're going to have all this peace and we're going to enjoy all this prosperity. And so it kind of helps us to understand why this great fall. Why all these people. And who knows the heart and the mind of every man already knows what they're thinking. And he uses this as an opportunity to give this parable in part to try to get this idea, the immediate establishment of the kingdom when he gets to Jerusalem happening. So you read about several people within the parable itself. Question number 10 kind of deals with that. These people represent certain individuals in certain groups. So you have the king in the parable. Who does king represent?
Talking about himself. So he's talking about himself.
Yeah, it represents Jesus, doesn't it? And then we have the servants. Who are the servants? Okay, going to be the priests. It's going to be those who are following Christ, right? Generally speaking. And then you have the subjects of this rest of this kingdom, or these citizens. Who are they? Yeah, they're unbelievers, aren't they? They're obviously not people who are following Jesus because they hate him. They don't want him to be king, do they? And so Jews would certainly fall into that category. A number of other people also. Anybody who's an unbeliever wouldn't want Jesus to be a king. What do we learn about what this nobleman or this king does? What's significant about what Jesus says he does? Well, what does he do first? Okay, he goes into a far country. Why? To receive a kingdom, and then what's going to happen? He's going to stay there, right? Yeah, he's going to come back. He's going to come back. So what do you think the significance of that is? Gain? Okay, but in that day and age, generally, how did people travel? They get in their car, or hop on an airplane, walk. Ride an animal, you walk mainly. So if you were going to go into a far country, were you going to be back pretty soon? You going to be back the next day? Next week? going to be a significant journey, right? Significant amount of time was going to pass. He was going to get a kingdom. After he got his kingdom, he was going to come back. So if the people are thinking that the kingdom is going to happen immediately, what do you think this is teaching them? Got some time, right? Not going to happen immediately. So going to take a little bit of time. Not going to be a slow return for the king. In the meanwhile, though, he calls his servants and he gives them money. And what does the man, question 11 here, what does the man or the king want his servants to do with the money he gives them?
Give him a return on it.
Yeah, business, right? It says, while I'm gone, you put my money into work, you get it in operation. You know, you do something with it. And so basically he was telling them, you conduct business for me while I'm gone. And I'm gonna put you guys in charge with this certain amount of my money. Your job is to take it, use it for business, put it in operation. When I come back, you know, tell me what you've done with it. So what do we learn from that? What's the application in that particular part? Where to work, and specifically work in what area? Yeah, we're supposed to conduct the business of the king, right? What was Jesus' business while he was on earth? Seek and save the lost, right? So that's our job. Jesus is gone. He left. He went away into a far country. He's entrusted his servants with his business. Our job is to get to work, right? Do what he's told us to do with the things that he's given to us. He's entrusted in our care. It's not the only work. There's other business to conduct, but that's certainly part of it. So, question number 12, what did the first two servants do with the money that the king entrusts to them?
They increased.
Yeah, they made good on his investment, did what they were supposed to do. They conducted business with it. You know, you think about the application of this parable for us today, and really that's what life is about, isn't it? I mean, Jesus has given us all these things here upon this earth, and he says, conduct my business. You know, I've given you all these, given you your body, given you the means, given you all these things that you need, and so it's really a test. What are we going to do as the servants of Jesus while he's gone? And the point is, when he gets back, he's going to say, who can I trust? And who can I not? Who's going to be responsible? You know, when I tell him to do something, who's going to do it like I told him to do it? And that's really, I think, the point of the parable for us. Which servants can he trust? Which ones can he not? Which servants are going to be responsible? Which ones are going to be irresponsible? So the king responds, of course, by rewarding them. Question 13, what does the third servant think of the king? Yeah, and specifically, why is he scared or afraid of it? What do you think about him? Yeah, he's too tough, right? He's too demanding of us. There's no way that you can please him. And so what as he does, what do those feelings or thoughts toward his master, what does that lead to him doing? Yeah, absolutely nothing. Now, what sense does that make? If you think you have a tough boss, you know, and your boss tells you to do something, you say, boy, it's going to be tough to please him. I think I'll do nothing. Does that make any sense? I mean, that's like the worst. If that's your thinking about your boss, you would probably be, I mean, common sense would tell you, I'm going to have to do extra, I'm going to have to work extra hard, or I'm going to have to go above and beyond, right? That's what that thinking should lead to. But the fact that this guy did nothing, and that's what the king says. He says, I'm going to judge you by your own thought process. You know, common sense would tell you should have done more than what you did if that was your mindset or your thinking. And so it doesn't have anything very good to say about this. How does he treat the third servant? Question 14.
Judging by his own thoughts, he says.
Yeah, he said, I'll just use your own words to bring you into judgment then, right? If you think that I was too hard and too harsh and too demanding, you need to go over the top in order to please me. You did nothing. That tells me what your sentence should be. So he's called wicked. Of course, he refused to obey. He slandered his master. I mean, what else you go call him? I don't know how else you could describe a person who completely defies the orders that's given to him by the king. Then you kind of have a principle here that summarizes the parable. Question 15. What is that principle?
You have to add to.
Do what?
We have to add to. We can't just do nothing.
Yeah, you got to use what God gives you, right? What happens if you don't use what God gives you? You lose it. We got a saying like that: use it or lose it, right? And that's the same way in the kingdom. You know, if God's given us all these things and we don't use them, what's going to happen to us in the end? Everything's going to be taken away. It's going to be given to somebody else. Who's it going to be given to? Person who used something, right? Person who's proved themselves faithful, proved themselves responsible. So you give it to somebody who you can trust. Take it away from the person you can't. And that's kind of the principle that operates or summarizes that parable there. Okay. Anybody got any thoughts? We're out of time. Thoughts, questions, comments, or anything before we end?
The only thing I would add to that is, we don't know what would happen had he lost it. Had he used it and lost it, then it couldn't be any worse than what
No.
happened.
No.
If he lost it all,
Yeah, and that's, fear is one of those things that often keeps us from doing what we should, isn't it? I mean, we're all guilty of that, I think, from time to time, but is being scared an excuse not to do what God tells us to do? Well, it's an excuse, but it's not going to work. It's not a good excuse, is it? Not one that God's going to accept in the end. So, yeah, and I have an idea if he'd used it, but it didn't happen, that he'd been all right, don't you?
I think he did.
Yeah.
At least as good as I
Yeah, maybe you need to write us another parable there, Dennis.
So what ultimately happens to Zaccheus?
Do what?
What ultimately happens to us?
I don't know. It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, by all indications, I think he was where he needed to be by the time Jesus left, don't you? Jesus was impressed with him, wasn't he? And the fact that he went and spent time with him in his house, and they talked about those things, I'm sure, at all, judging from the type of person that he was. And, you think about rich men in the Bible, and this is one of the things that's impressive to me about Zaccheus. Jesus had said a little bit earlier, it's hard for rich men to enter into the kingdom of heaven. He asked one young guy to give up everything that he had. He wasn't going to do it. Zaccheus, he didn't even ask him. He was giving up half of what he had to the poor. So that's pretty impressive to me. I think it kind of shows his mindset.
That's what I was gonna say. Really, you don't need to get it all. Zacchaeus, he gave us back himself.
Yeah, and by law, he didn't even have to do that. But he was willingly giving that up. I think he just had a really good heart. And it goes back to one of those principles: how can a rich man enter into heaven? Only with God. It's only going to happen through God, isn't it? But that's a good working illustration of it. So appreciate the time.